Good afternoon. Welcome everyone who's here face-to-face and everyone who's joining us online for the second day of the 16th Annual Archaeology Weekend. It's a pleasure to have you all here. I know that we have a lot of fun things to talk about, and I cannot be more excited about having Petra as the focus of our work this weekend. Like many Americans, my first exposure to Petra came at the end of the 1989 Indiana Jones in the Last Crusade movie. And after that, I thought, I have to go find that place. I have to see that face to face. 12 years later, I had the privilege of traveling to Petra as a scholar teacher and actually participating in some work in some archaeology digs, not in Petra, but in other places in Jordan. But seeing Petra, I will never forget. As I rounded that last curve of the Seek and saw the treasury in front of me, and the feeling that I had inside when that happened has me agreeing wholeheartedly with Larry Herr when he calls Petra the greatest archaeological site on Earth. So I look forward to more of our conversations this afternoon about Petra. Some of you know that I am a water scholar, and so I often look at the rivers and the water channels and basins and cisterns and so forth in the various places. That fascinates me a lot. And I often think of those water channels and rivers as threads that the people in the region hold in their hands in the 21st century that connect their past, whether that be Petra or elsewhere, hundreds and thousands of years into the past. So as I think about those strands and how they connect through Petra, I'm excited to hear more of our scholarly presentations this afternoon. So welcome, and now I would like to turn the time over to Dr. Friedbert Ninow, who is an archaeologist, an Old Testament scholar, and the dean of the HMS Richards Divinity School. Dr. Ninow.
Welcome to our meeting this afternoon. I was debating with myself whether Petra is really the #1 site or whether Khirbet Balua is it, because it's spectacular, it's ancient, has all the ingredients. No tourists. That makes it to the #1 destination at times. Anyway, welcome to this afternoon's presentation. Our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Cynthia Finlayson. She is Associate Professor of Ancient, Classical, and Islamic Archaeology and Museum Studies at Brigham Young University in the Department of Anthropology. She received her PhD in Classical Art History from the University of Iowa. Dr. Finlayson has worked in the Near East for 44 years, beginning her archaeological field training in Petra, Jordan in 1977 with Dr. Philip Hammond of the University of Utah. Dr. Finlayson has researched the funerary portraits of Palmyra since 1998 in Syria and has traveled throughout the world cataloging and studying Palmyrene portraits in the major museum collections of the Near East, Turkey, Europe, and the United States. Her archaeology team was the last Western archaeological group out of Syria at the end of June 2011 as the Syrian civil war escalated. She currently directs the Adair Monument and Plateau project in Petra. The title of her topic today, Nabatean Water Saving Strategies in Petra, Lessons for a Warming Climate. Welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for attending today, and a special thanks for the invitation from the Center of Near Eastern Archaeology here at La Sierra. It's been a wonderful visit. Before I start this presentation today, if there's one or two things that I want to leave with you, it is I don't expect all of us are going to start digging and excavating half-meter wide water trenches around every mountain in California, like the Nabateans did in Petra. But I hope that you'll appreciate and take home with you applications of how the Nabateans survived in a desert environment. And that was, number one, understanding their weather patterns, and number two, understanding how those weather patterns interfaced with the topography and the geography that they lived in. I have to give credit in this talk to my grandfather, who spent some of his childhood on the reservation in South Dakota, where we're from, but also was an old cowboy. He eventually bought a cattle farm in eastern South Dakota, where I grew up. And being someone who survived on the plains, as my grandparents did, they conserved water in every possible way. So this has application for us today, to think about what our pioneer ancestors did to survive. One of the things at his new farm is he had a 40-foot deep cistern, and that provided all of the water for the household. And I know if my mother knew what he had done with us grandkids, she would have killed him. But we loved it, because we're living out on the farm, have no swimming pool. He would have us clean that cistern about every 2 to 3 years. So first he'd lower down a corn cob lip to make sure there was no gases down there. Then he'd lower us down a bucket with a big scoop shovel, and we'd scoop up all the sludge and the frogs, and it would come out. We thought that was great. Little did I know that it was preparation for what I'm doing right now, okay? So we're going to be talking today about survival in Petra, where the estimated rainfall is very, very little, and it supposedly has not changed a lot since antiquity. I gave you some rough estimates of rainfall, and between Utah, southern Utah, and southern California. If the Nabateans can survive on what they had, we can certainly do better. So I'm not going to be talking about the center part of the city. I really appreciate Leanne's presentation yesterday with the pool complex. But just remind everybody here that the Nabateans in Petra were centrally placed to control caravan routes in the area, and particularly the rugged topography of Petra helped them protect themselves on many occasions against aggressors. They therefore drew a lot of ideas, and I'm not going to get into the debate about where they originally came from. I know I have my feelings about that, but they certainly, given the irrigation and water systems they had in Petra, were aware of the southern Hadramaut Valley, Yemen, as we know it today, southern Arabia, where there were lots of irrigation systems that developed anciently. So why are these water control systems today valuable to us? So the third thing I want you to think about is the value of archaeology, not just in understanding ancient civilizations, but what archaeology can teach us to survive ourselves. Because we're studying ancient civilizations and how they dealt with very critical survival types of issues. And we are beginning to have to address some of these ourselves. So there's a lot of things we could learn from the Nabateans. I could have put up newspaper articles from California, from Utah, New Mexico, Arizona, and now they're having a drought cycle in some parts of the Midwest. But I chose to put up, because I had presented this at ASOR before, and thank you, Doug, for seeing it, inviting me, some of the critical issues in Jordan. And that was really, I think Leanne outlined yesterday, Jordan is one of the driest countries in the world, and yet a huge burgeoning population, as well as taking in incredible amounts of refugees, particularly since 1947-48 with the Palestinian Nakba, the '67 war. They have over 1.5 million Syrians right now. They took in Libyans, Sudanese. And this is a country that does not have enough water for itself. So let's talk about what the Nabateans did anciently. One of the things that they did was to often dam up small wadis or valleys where they knew water was running. And some of these have been restored, particularly around Petra. Some of the things that they did, and it's interesting in the Negev population, human population, was one of its highest points during Nabatean occupation. And they had some very, very interesting, inventive ways. Leanne mentioned yesterday the flash floods. And if you want to see a flash flood, I'll give you the Google address for a movie that our university did about our project. It's called Journey to Petra, Preserving the Adair Monument. It's a little outmoded, but you can see, particularly the flash flood coming down the stairs in that movie is coming all from Adair. And it's coming down to the central city. So controlling these things not only helps provide water and protect the Adair Monument, which I've been charged to do, but also protects the antiquities that are coming down into the central city itself. In the Negev, the Nabateans created moguls. Now, I think of moguls as those terrible things I don't want to run into on the ski slope at Park City, but they created moguls with soil, so that when the water rushed down, it bounced off and slowed the water down so that it would percolate into the soils. They also created square fields. The Hopi do this in the Southwest also, to concentrate water around agricultural locations. So you can see that some of these, particularly the one on this one is still semi-functional because it's still slowing down water as it cascades down the slope. So since I can't read this screen, I'm going to have to read up here. I'm just going to give you, there's a lot of people that have talked about water situations in Nabatea, and these are just a few scholars. I'm just going to flip through these very quickly, particularly focusing on John Olson, who has done so much work at Humeima. And I didn't have enough room on the slides to put all of his works. So he is really critical to take a look at. Now, let's take you up to Adair. The Adair project, we've been charged by the Jordanian government since 2013 to try to protect the Adair Monument because it was greatly harmed by seasonal erosion, water erosion, but also wind erosion. It's different from El Khazna, that's down the Sikh. The El Khazna is very well protected, where it's situated kind of nudged down at the end of the Sikh there. It does get erosion issues from water, but it's protected mostly from wind. The Adair Monument that I'm going to show you in a minute, that is located right here in the aerial, okay, is open face toward the southwest, mostly toward the west, and it receives all of the storms coming up that great funnel of the Wadi Araba up from the Red Sea. It received all of the storms as well as snow, rain, wind, and the Nabateans realized that, and they had protective types of edifices that they created. For example, there used to be a wall around the Temenos courtyard, particularly on the south side, but that wall is now collapsed. And so some of the erosion on the facade of the Adair Monument is created by wind, like a big sand blaster, as well as the water erosion. So the first thing we had to do was fly a drone 300 meters above the surface to try to figure out what the topography was. What were the Nabateans dealing with? And then the next thing we did, very quickly, was that was all connected with GPS, and then we took GPS and did a survey of every 50 by 50 meter square on the plateau. That took us from 2013 to 2018. We finally finished it that summer. And that gave us a really good idea of the concentration of cultural deposits, buildings, et cetera, but also the plateau itself and how water ran off of it. On the southern side of the plateau, on the south of the ridge, everything runs toward the Adair Monument. So that has been the issue that we're trying to deal with. So we identified 4 kind of major sites that we needed to work on. First of all, the Temenos slot, the northern entrance into the Adair courtyard itself, which is really the catch basin for everything. Out of that catch basin came over 800 ancient coins because everything was flowing down. The Great Circle, which you can see the kind of the circle on this map, and also the Eastern Cliff Cisterns, which I'm going to be talking about a little bit today. So what I'm going to try to do is organize this in types of cisterns that are up on the plateau. There are lots of other types of water systems, as Dr. Dahl talked about yesterday, so I'm just focusing on what we observed up here as some strategies from the Nabateans. First of all, there's a type 1A. I'm going to give you examples of all these in just a minute, which is a typical bell-shaped cistern or rectangular-shaped small cisterns. This is common throughout the dry eastern Mediterranean, all over the place. The second is type 1B, an enhanced bell-shaped cistern or rectangular cistern. And this is enhanced with additional water channels, bringing water in, even creating waterfalls that come into the bell cistern, et cetera, et cetera. Type 2A are enhanced bedrock cisterns. Type 1B is a surface bedrock watershed collection system that I'm going to show you in just a minute, some examples. Type 3 is enhanced natural crevasse cisterns. And number 4 are the big cliff cisterns that we've been clearing on the bottom of Jebel Fatuma that I'm going to show you in just a minute how huge they are. So these are some of the main strategies where the Nabateans used their topography and enhanced it for water collection itself. Typical bell cisterns, as I said, these are all over the eastern Mediterranean, the Greek islands, every place that people were having to try to collect water to survive. Sometimes in Petra, they can be used also as filtration systems. So every mountain, as I'll show you in just a minute, is carved in Nabatea with runnels and channels. Now think about the engineering of this, because if you bring down water too fast, it's going to wash out things below. But you have to have enough gravity feed to bring it down that it's going to be serviceable. And so they knew the exact angle to create these for kilometers down mountains to bring water down. They often then would dump them into a filtration system or a deep rectangular basin to filter out the sludge and bring the pure water down for human use. These are just different types all over the plateau. In our GPS survey, we were giving each a number in the mega system that Jordan was trying to document every archaeological site in the region with. Now, one of the things we notice that is the bell cisterns are almost always associated with the cliff face in many cases. So they're using the weather that hits the cliff to bring the water down. And oftentimes the cliff itself acts as a filtration system, which is very, very interesting. Now, just to give you some other examples of how this works, these are the huge water channels that are all over the place in Petra. I have a theory that this and stairs is what they made disobedient teenagers do on weekends. So they're just everywhere, just thousands of them. And a lot of them are also associated with burial complexes, garden complexes with tombs. To show you how rugged this terrain is up at the Adair Plateau and other places in Petra, this is our GPS mapping. You can see how steep this is. There were just some places we couldn't get to, and hopefully the Nabateans didn't either. So the drone was pretty effective in helping us with that. But you can see in the spring and winter runoff, this is a huge waterfall that comes down, and how they've used different types of damming and cistern complexes to control that. Just different water channels. Against the cliff, it's hard to get satellite connections, so we have to measure things physically, which is fine too. And I wanted to show you a settlement pool here. Let's see, let's back it up just a minute. This is over on this side, is a channel coming down into a settlement pool to then bring the sludge out of the water itself. So they're very savvy about how to deal with water, how to make it palatable, how to purify it, and then bring it down into other qanat or underground systems that they're using. Oftentimes they're using surfaces that collect water, and we'll talk about that a little bit more. So stairwells, quarry sites. All the quarry sites up on the mountains here have channels that run off the cliff that also help the water come down and be usable. The type 2A is an enhanced bedrock carved cisterns, and type 2B, we'll talk about it in a minute, as watersheds. These are the types of cisterns where there were already 3 sides that were carved out of the stone, and the Nabateans always got 2 products out of every effort they put in. They're very efficient. So they're probably using the stones for building, quarrying this, but then creating a cistern on 3 sides with rock sides, and the 4th side is then a built wall or a dam system. And if you see above this, here it is, this was all vaulted. And they're vaulting, Leanne mentioned this yesterday, they're vaulting to keep the water purified, but also, as we're finding in the excavations and cisterns, the cliff cisterns, they're trying to keep algae bloom from happening with sunlight coming in. They've used this is a combination of using a surface where they've used channels on each of the sides to bring the water down into this particular system too. And there's just hundreds of these all over the place. The other type is a water surface containment system that uses the bedrock in order to collect water. So we're working, one of the sites I mentioned was the Great Circle. You can see its association with the Adair Monument. It once controlled all the water coming from the west straight toward the Adair Monument. And we were surprised to find, the Nabateans always surprise us, that number one, they were using this as a quarry first, and you can still see the quarry channels. 2/3 of it, the closest to you, is all bedrock surface that they have used and carved. The final section that's closest to the Adair Monument is actually a dam. It's a glacé dam, which is quite substantial. So here's just some of the excavation processes for the Great Circle early on and mapping. Okay. This is the glacé dam on that side, and people have thought it was a road, some kind of other building, but upon further excavation and cleaning, it's actually a dam that completes that circle. The Great Circle, as far as we know, it's almost a perfect 60-meter in diameter circle. It's the largest that we know of water containment circular system in a desert environment in the world. So Jordan has a wonderful archaeological site here. So we're about halfway done. It has 2 outer rings also that were built later under Eratosth IV, probably, who was very busy up here on the plateau during his time period. And there are tons of water channels with covers that brought water down to the interior of the circle itself. Now I want to show you some other surface kinds of collectance systems that fall under this category that if you've been to Petra, you may not have known they were there. First of all, the insidious Movenpick Hotel built itself right over an incredible Nabatean water collection site. So this is part of it. You can see the limestone bedrock that fed down into a group of cisterns below it. And just this direction toward you is a gigantically constructed surface, huge, gigantic stone cistern, wall cistern, that probably served to maybe enhance water access for the caravans coming in from this direction from the Damascus Road. The other one that I was excited to find is over at Shobak. If you look off the walls of Shobak, you'll see this exposed bedrock type B surface collection area that goes right down into a cistern where the green trees are below it that still extends today. This was anciently an Edomite site that was eventually taken over by the Nabateans. Then, of course, it's been used subsequently in every major historical period in Jordan. The next type is a type 3 enhanced natural crevasse cistern. This is where you have a mounted crevasse or wedge crevasse, and the Nabateans would maximize it by then creating a 3rd or 4th wall in that crevasse, vaulting it, and then using it for water collection, particularly in areas where they saw the water naturally coming down into these areas of the topography. This is just the GPS service. You can see the collapsed vaulting and rock and stone walls, ashlar stone. Another good example of that is the beautiful area, Apwadi Farasa, the garden tomb. The cistern behind this is a crevasse cistern. Here's the crevasse that has been utilized, and then I'll back it up and you can see the Nabatean dam wall at the end of it to create water collection areas for this beautiful tomb complex. Okay. And so much of what Leanne was talking about yesterday applies here with the Near Eastern Association of watering the thirsty dead, potential Egyptian influence, but as well as others in the region. So a lot of the tombs have gardens within Petra that are just beautiful. I enjoyed the comment about Alexander turning the name of Petra into Hadriana, his own name. Apparently the story goes that he was so impressed with the beauty and the greenery that existed here in the desert, as well as the landscape, that's why he called it after himself. We have other examples of functioning crevasse cisterns. The one that's just right below Jebel Nebi Harun is a crevasse cistern that's still being in use. It's been restored in the Islamic period and still used by the locals today, centered around a previously Nabatean site as well as a Byzantine church site and monastery site. Okay. Now, the type 4 are the largest ones. These are cliff cisterns, huge containment structures. I'll show you the one we finished Eastern Cistern B, we're working on C. What you're seeing here is the cistern complex underneath the Bergberg Monument. If you've ever been to Petra up at Adair, oftentimes the Bedouin will entice you to come up to the tent on top of the mountain. That's actually the Bergberg Monument, which is a whole nother lecture to give about what that building actually was. Potentially a royal palace, strategic stronghold that was up here in antiquity. There is a huge complex system underneath this. It is this original slide on my left. And there probably are cisterns that run around the complete base of that mountain. There are water channels that feed down from the top of the building structure into these cisterns themselves. So we're just only getting the tip of the iceberg as far as what the Nabateans were doing with their topography. This brings us to Eastern Cistern B, cliff cistern, underneath Jebel Fatuma. And these are the huge, gigantic cisterns, probably created even before the Adair Monument was built. Because if you think about it, to build that size of a rock-cut facade, it's the largest one in Petra. When you go up to the top, in the movie I mentioned to you, we cleaned the second story in conjunction with our geologists and did a study, as well as the geologist, sandstone geologist from Czech University. And it's so high, it gives you vertigo. It's that high. So there had to be water put in place before that kind of facade could have been created. This cistern has no stairwell exit, and so that's why we've had to wall it, and hopefully not anyone will fall into it. The Bedouin are using it today. It has a huge capacity. It carries, when full, over 500 cubic meters of water, and there are 7 of these at the base of Jebel Fatuma. So I hope this works. It kind of shows you, hopefully, how deep it is and the last of the screened soils that are coming out. We had to get a winch in order to do this because it's so deep. Bedouins with winches are really interesting, okay? We're all trained. They all can work for construction crews now, so that's a good thing. The water channel at the base of this mountain that feeds these cisterns, this is what it looked like before we cleared it. And that cistern I just showed you was completely covered with cliff collapse. And so it was kind of a sealed context, which made it very valuable archaeologically. So on the right is what it looks like today. And we're now working on Eastern Cistern C1 that's next to it, that's producing a lot of pottery that is very exciting to do studies on. There's all kinds of these cliff cisterns. One of the most famous ones, if you visited Petra and went up to Little Beta, is this particular cistern. It's restored, it's used locally today. It's called the Cistern of the Brides because there was a older Bedouin tradition, Amarine and Bedouin, for brides to go up there and take their final bath before the wedding and then put henna or mud prints on the walls with their hands. So that's why it's called that. Okay, so these are just a few of the major types. So what can we learn from this? Number one, almost every ancient archaeological site in Jordan from the Iron Age through the Islamic eras, hosts ready-built water control and containment systems that simply need erosion clearances and maintenance. But we need to regain the Nabatean awareness of how our landscapes can be interconnected with weather patterns and also enhance renewable rain and snow melt. So for Jordan, what's really interesting, they've spent a lot of millions of dollars of grant money bringing up a water pipeline coming in from a new aquifer out in the desert. Everything goes to Amman because that's where the population growth is the highest, okay? What would really be wonderful is if we could have programs that have archaeological professionals involved, but also begin to clear these erosion-filled water systems. They're incredible. All the way from this time period down through the Islamic period, particularly the Umayyads were involved in reinvigorating agriculture in this area of the world, and particularly along the pilgrimage, the Hajj sites through Jordan itself. The engineering is already there. The ancient engineering exists. It just needs to be cleaned out and restored for these smaller communities. Although UNESCO prefers that the Jordanian Department of Antiquities not open new excavation site concessions in locations such as Petra for conservation reasons. Rock-cut water systems are best preserved by restoration and maintenance rather than neglect, as they're often turned into garbage dumps or even, in some cases, fire pits, which we often see up at Adair. Okay. Many ancient water systems not only contain seasonal water events, but also are part of flood control systems that protect freestanding and rock-carved structures that are irreplaceable, particularly in Petra. Restoring ancient water control systems thus enhances UNESCO goals of the conservation of archaeological and historical sites. Using natural renewable rain and snow meltwater resources for agriculture purposes preserves soil viability. When you fly over Colorado and you see the big round fields in Colorado, particularly in other states too, that are fed by a central well that's pumping water from the aquifer, you're not only draining the aquifer, which is another problem in the Near East right now. Particularly the oasis aquifers are being pumped unbelievably, since in gas and electric motors can do that now. When you do that, you bring up all the salination, the salts and minerals that are in that groundwater, and it causes the soil to be unusable in about 200 years. So, or less, unless you're taking other precautions. So using natural snow and rain melt is the best process in order to keep your agricultural land viable. Given modern solar pump and water filtration systems, ancient water containment facilities can be put back into modern uses, both economically and safely, which is one of our goals up at Adair, is to try to do a prototype of how do you aesthetically link up modern technologies like solar panels with pumps on an archaeological site. So this is one of the design elements that we've been working on the last year too. So there's a lot we can learn from the Nabateans. I would suggest you take a look at these two books too, particularly here in California. They're very, very valuable in thinking about how you preserve water. You probably don't know this, but in order to regain this pioneer attitude, sort of, and Nabatean attitude, in Utah, until a few years ago, it was illegal for us to collect rainwater off our own house roofs because the irrigation companies that had been set up claimed every stitch of water that fell from the sky. It wasn't until Larry Miller, who was a wealthy car dealer, wanted to build a totally green car dealership in Salt Lake Valley, that he ran into this problem, and he had the money to take it to the legislature in Utah. So now we can collect a certain amount of gallons, but it's probably not enough. But it's those types of attitudes that we need to get changed if we're going to face what we have to face with global warming and drying climates, and trying not to pump our aquifers and use them up. So I have a little bit of time left for questions. What time of year? Okay. In this area, does it rain? Planting usually happens in the fall, because the rains happen over late fall, winter, and early spring. So, and as we said, when the water comes, particularly in Petra, it's like the dangers that we have in slot canyons in southern Utah. It just comes all at once. And so it takes a lot of engineering thought to control the power of that water that comes if you're going to preserve it. But that's the time period where it happens.
So looking at that cistern of the brides, that looks very similar to Montezuma's castle in Arizona, which I'm sure you're familiar with. Just very, very similar how it's set up in the mountain like that.
Yeah. There are some similarities between the two cultures because they're both dealing with a desert environment. So, and like I said, you know, the way that both Anasazi and Fremont decided to build structures in the cliff to preserve corn, maize, or other structures for other purposes, is just using the topography to the best advantage. And like I said, the Hopi are really interesting because they're more agricultural, and they end up creating square plots of land, and then companion planting different crops together, like corn and beans, et cetera, squash, and concentrating the water in that square. And we see the Nabateans doing the same thing in the Negev.
Yeah, on some of those cisterns that you showed, it looked like the walls were very solid, but
Yes.
the floor looked like it was just dirt. So didn't the water just kind of seep down into the groundwater?
Those are probably cisterns that hadn't been cleaned out yet. It's just the erosion of the sand that's gone in over time. So
There is kind of a bedrock
it is a
somewhere
bedrock,
down
yeah.
the bottom.
Yeah, and for the larger cisterns, particularly like the cliff cisterns that we're excavating, they're plastered. And the plaster in Eastern Cistern B was almost pristine. It'd been replastered 4 or 5 times. It's not used as long as Eastern Cistern C. Cistern C is used, as we're finding out, into the Byzantine period, but it was replastered and taken care of. So it prevented, it's sandstone, and some of it's limestone, depending on the vein that you're working in. But those stones are very soft and absorbent, and so it had to be plastered to hold the water.
Because there was one of those cisterns that looked like it would just, the water would just seep down through the bottom.
Yeah, it's because it hadn't been cleaned out.
Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah, it's just erosion fill.
I have a question for you, Cindy.
Oh, hi, Doug. Yeah.
So you talked about at least some of the reservoirs being covered with vaulting to prevent algae blooms and so on. What kind of percentage, at least can we know archaeologically or architecturally, were covered over?
Boy, that's a good question. I'd have to go back and look at our GPS mapping on the plateau. The ones that we can observe, and you have to remember, we're just doing surface mapping, where what we can see on the surface. I would say of the larger cisterns like that, about 98%, I would guess, were vaulted. Yeah. So the smaller ones, not so much, but those big ones, yes, definitely.
Sort of a video available of one of these floods?
Yes,
Do you have a link to that, or?
I could tell you the title. You can just Google search it.
Okay.
It's Journey to Petra,
Okay,
Preserving the Adair Monument. Okay.
thank you.
The altitude of Petra is about halfway between that of the Araba Valley and the mountains farther to the east, which I think are almost 5,000 feet in places, 4,500 certainly. That means that more rain falls farther to the east, and that's what causes these vicious flash floods like in the Seek. Is there any
It
evidence?
also makes Showback more
Yeah.
fertile. Yeah.
Yeah. Is there any evidence that the Nabateans brought in water from those higher altitudes to the Adair plain?
Oh, that's a good question. I think Leanne, in the region, Leanne plotted some of the spring canals that were brought in. I have not seen any evidence that they're going that far because there's so much to be collected in Petra itself. The spring water up at Adair, there's a possibility that on the side cut walls of the Adair monument, the cliff, not the facade itself, there is a seep that comes out on the north side. And it's possible that was earlier in history more free-flowing, and maybe why the site and the plateau was used, because we have a north temple, a south temple, all kinds of things going on up there cultically. It has since reduced. One of the Bedouin, Harun, and his father restored the Nabatean Dam that's in Wadi Fatuma, and they were being blamed for this water seeping out close to the Adair and creating too much foliage. One of our students, Josie Newbold, who's going to present at ASOR next week, did an oxygen isotope study on all the water in the region, including Petra, and discovered it's a spring inside the mountain. And there's a number of other springs within Petra itself. They're just starting to dry up. There's less springs there than I saw when I was there in 1977. And some of that is just calcium calcification that's closing up the vents coming out. But that's a good question. I'll have to look into that, but I'm not aware of any. They're coming that far.
The gentleman over here mentioned or was asking about how many of them were vaulted, and you were mentioning that not all of them were vaulted. There was a certain percentage that weren't. Is it possible that they were separating that water out as like a non-potable water for crop irrigation, where they weren't necessarily worried about algae and any other contaminants? And then the other question that I had from yesterday was more about the actual personal use of the water, not necessarily for the garden pool or crop irrigation, but in any types of homes and any sewage. Do you have any evidence of that?
That's a really good question. The evidence that we have so far, we've only found one clay piping system up there that is exposed, and that's way on the north side of the plateau, which was definitely agricultural. Out front of these cisterns, the eastern cistern B and C, the Nabateans created a little basin, which was probably used for livestock to come and drink. For personal use, we know of, but we haven't excavated because it isn't in our permit to excavate underground canals. They're called qanats from the Persian period that go down to towards both the temples, the North Temple particularly, and then the housing areas. So that's something we'd love to get a drone infrared camera in, but right now there's restrictions in Jordan about archaeological use of drones. So, which is another long story that I have to tell you. But we have it, we've got the drone, we just don't have the permit to do it, to see what we can see.